Due to Congress's voting schedule, there will be a short delay, but we'll start momentarily. Due to the voting schedule of Congress, we are starting with a short delay. We'll begin momentarily. We've been slightly delayed due to votes, but we'll be beginning momentarily. Thanks for joining us. Our apologies for the delay. The voting schedule got in the way. We'll begin momentarily. Everyone, we've been slightly delayed due to votes. We'll begin shortly. Thank you for waiting.
about farm policy, right? Okay, I don't usually see this number of people show up for some. We have a few more people listed in. We can test the drill here, there's been a slight adjustment to the program. Ricardo Salvador was going to be the moderator, and for some reason, the fact that he had to go to the emergency room a couple hours ago, he's not going to be with us. You know, we think he's all right, but so it'll be a little adjustment with this effort. Our goal here is to have the briefest of introductory comments from me, because we've got some certified smart people here who have things to say, making some brief comments. We will have sort of a keynote by my friend Michael Pollan. And then after we've gone through the drill, there'll be an opportunity for people to share questions and observations. We got a little bit of a late start, but I don't think they're going to drag us out of here exactly at 3. We'll go a little longer. I, however, am going to catch an airplane, and they're not going to leave that for me. So I will be leaving about 3:30, but I hope it's still going strong at that point. We really do appreciate your patience. I'm stalling for a second. So Michael is here, and then we will launch very quickly. Ta-da! Okay, we're ready to go live. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Blumenauer. I'm a member of Congress from Portlandia. And for the last 3 years, I've been involved with a project to take a different approach to the Farm Bill. I've been working on the Farm Bill since I was first elected to Congress. I was concerned that we paid too much to the wrong people to do the wrong things, and that there were things that we might be able to do to make an adjustment for the people that I represent. People who eat, people who appreciate good food, care about the environment. And every year since I've been here, we've had an interesting coalition of people who've been involved around the edges. We've done some, we've had some incremental progress. Shelley, come on forward. We've had some incremental progress with the Farm Bill. It's not that it hasn't made a difference, but as a practical matter, it's not as good as it should be. And I've sort of embarked on a project a couple years ago to take it differently, not to have 1 or 2 little things that people might be involved with, and we might get an amendment here or push that, but ask the question, what would a farm bill look like if it was designed for the people I represent? We called the project Sing Your Own Farm Bill, and I went around to Oregon, interacted with over 5,000 people over the course of those 2 years, and it was fascinating. Large and small, east and west, urban, rural. And what I found was that there was an amazing consensus about things that people cared about, and it's not how the Farm Bill is structured. Some of you may have read Marion Nussel's brilliant essay, "The Farm Bill Drove Me Crazy," talking about how it's just not aligned, it's hopelessly complex, nobody really understands it. So we tried to start to look at what a farm bill would look like. And I won't go into the details. You've got a 20-page report that is the culmination of my discussions around Oregon for those 2 years. We rolled it out this summer and found a lot of people who were really kind of excited about it. And interestingly, it was a pretty broad coalition. People agreed on far more than they disagreed. So we have this 20-page report. My staff, Kevin Stock, some of you know Kevin. Where's Kevin? Wave your hand. Working tirelessly. Liv Brumfield back home. Our entire team has been working on this. And we've taken this 20-page report It's available online, and we boil it down into just about a 100-page bill. But it's introduced today, ready to go. And because it seemed to me that we really need to make it simple enough for those of us in Congress to understand, we even have an illustrated little guide, The Fight for Food. And there may even be a few of these that will be available in the course of the project. I didn't realize quite how popular they would be. We'll have an online version available to you. But we're trying to have all the tools. But we start here with the conversation today. And we start, I can't think of a better person to kick us off than Michael Pollan, somebody I've worked with for the better part of a decade, trying to find my way through this, enjoy his books, his rock star status in Portlandia, but also being able to boil this down in ways that are simple and common sense and engage people. And so we're honored to have Michael kind of kick us off with some comments today. Then we've got an all-star panel. We've got two rock star members of Congress, Rosa DeLauro and Shelley Pingree, who've been champions. That understates what they've done. I will shut up. I will turn it over to Michael. We'll turn it to the panel, and then to you. Michael.
Thank you, Earl. Thank you very much. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. It's an honor to be part of this initiative, which I think is really important. I brought a couple props. I'll get to those in a minute. So I want to see if I can boil it down a little bit for you to put these issues, which are so important, into some pretty simple terms. A few years ago, an obesity researcher in Washington State named Adam Drunowski set out to solve a mystery. Why is it that the most reliable predictor of obesity and type 2 diabetes in this country is a person's wealth? For most of history, after all, it wasn't like this. The poor had suffered from a shortage of calories, not a surfeit. So how is it today that the people with the least amount of money to spend on food are the ones most likely to be obese and diabetic? So he sent his graduate students out with $2, each of them, and told them, gave them instructions to find how many calories they could get with $1 of food and of beverage. And they came back with a pretty startling and revealing set of statistics. They found that with $1 they could get 1,200 calories of cookies or chips. They gravitated to the middle aisles of the supermarket. They could only get 250 calories of carrots or broccoli. For beverages, they found they could get 875 calories of soda for their $1, and only 170 calories of juice. So consider these two food items that I brought along. Pack of Twinkies and a bunch of carrots. These Twinkies, 99 cents in a convenience store in Cambridge. These carrots, $2.99. Now, this is kind of counterintuitive. This is a very complex product. There are 39 ingredients in this product, many of which you've never heard of. Really advanced food chemistry. This product, not this particular pack, but a couple years ago when I was on book tour, I brought a pack of Twinkies with me, and I wanted to see how long it would stay soft. And 2 years later, it was still soft. So this is a sophisticated piece of food manufacturing, only 99 cents. And this is a very simple bunch of roots, and it's 3 times the price. This perverse state of affairs is not the result of the free market. It has more to do, in fact, with the Farm Bill than the free market. And the reason for that is that these Twinkies are made predominantly from corn and wheat and soybeans. And these are 3 of the commodity crops that we heavily subsidize to the tune of $10 billion in the year 2016. So that's how you can produce cheap calories, okay? But they tend to be, as derivatives of these commodity crops, the least healthy calories in the supermarket. By comparison, the Farm Bill does very little for the carrot growers. And that's why we've seen over the last few decades the price of fruits and vegetables increase by more than 40% since 1985, while the cost of soda, which is also a corn-based food, right? It's liquid corn in the form of high fructose corn syrup, declined by 23%. Now, many of the provisions of the Farm Bill made sense when the biggest public health threat we faced as a country was undernutrition. But the bigger problem today is overnutrition, too many of the wrong sort of calories. Overnutrition, in fact, is killing us. Four of the top 10 killers now are chronic diseases linked to diet. Of the $3 trillion we spent on healthcare in this country, more than half goes to treat chronic diseases linked to diet. And consider the perversity of this situation. Our government is spending, is paying for insulin pumps. At the same time, it is subsidizing high fructose corn syrup. That creates the need for insulin pumps. We're fighting both sides on the war on obesity. The kindest thing you can say about the farm bills that we've had is that they're obsolete, designed for a world that is long gone, and that its consequences, their consequences for public health, for the environment, for the struggles of farmers in the developing world are unintended. I think that's the best thing you can say about it. We may not think about it this way, but the Farm Bill is the most important piece of health legislation that will pass Congress. And we will not address the epidemic of chronic diseases unless we fix a Farm Bill that is contributing mightily to that epidemic. We may not think about it this way, but the Farm Bill is also the most important piece of environmental legislation that will pass Congress. Why? Because it sets the incentives and disincentives that we present to farmers that determine how they manage their land, whether to maximize productivity using a handful of monocultures and very advanced chemistry, or leave their land fallow for much of the year, or barren for much of the year, or douse it with lots of chemicals and fertilizers. All those incentives grow out of the nature of this Farm Bill. The role of agriculture and the food system in general in climate change, I think, is still not adequately appreciated or recognized. But we know that somewhere between 20 and 30% of greenhouse gases that we produce in this country are coming from the food system. That's on the farm, that's in the feedlot, and that's in this system that requires so much transportation. And it's in the fertilizer, it's in the pesticides. These are all fossil fuel creations. So that is a bigger contribution to climate change even than the transportation sector. I don't think people realize that 1/3 of the carbon currently in the atmosphere was formerly in the soil. And actually climate change begins with the invention of agriculture. When we started plowing, we released this carbon into the atmosphere, and then we vastly accelerated that with industrial farming, because industrial farming essentially is a very good system for translating soil carbon into atmospheric carbon. Just give you one example, fertilizers. We don't pay much attention to nitrates in the system. And we know that the damage they do to waterways, we heard about that earlier today. But what happens to those nitrogen fertilizers when they get wet is they turn into nitrous oxide, which is one of the most potent greenhouse gases, even more potent than methane, and 100 times more potent than carbon. And we're releasing huge amounts of nitrous oxide into the atmosphere. To give you one example of how significant that is, a couple years ago, Walmart decided they wanted to analyze their carbon footprint because they have a big environmental sustainability initiative. And they wanted to see where's the biggest part of our carbon footprint. And they thought maybe it would be heating and cooling these big box stores or their global transportation network. No, it turned out to be the nitrogen fertilizers spread on the cornfields at the base of their food chain that creates all the soda and all the meat and all the Twinkies that they sell. That was the biggest part of their carbon footprint. And we're encouraging farmers to flat out production and use as much fertilizer as possible. So as with public health, we will never successfully address climate change without fixing the Farm Bill. So that's the bad news. I want to talk very briefly about a little good news, because I think that Representative Blumenauer's bill proves this, that it's possible to design a farm bill that not only supports our farmers, but at the same time supports the health of our eaters and the health of the natural world. Now we need to do what Earl has asked us to do, and I turn to the panel for this, and I want the staffers too and the policy mavens in this room to think about, which is to engage in an act of imagination. How can we begin to align our farm policies, our support for farmers, with both our public health objectives and our environmental objectives? When we do this, when we achieve that alignment, we will put a huge dent in both the problem, the healthcare crisis around chronic disease and climate change. So imagine a farm bill that rewarded farmers for diversifying what they grow, rather than monocultures. More diversity in the field leads to more diversity in the diet. Imagine a farm bill that gave farmers incentives for sequestering carbon in their soils. Take some of that carbon out of the atmosphere, which only photosynthesis right now can do, and put it back in the soils. We know how to do this. Plant cover crops, rotationally graze livestock, compost. This would achieve several goals at once, none of them zero-sum. It improves fertility, it improves the water holding capacity of the land, and it improves the resilience of our farms. And it would begin not only to mitigate climate change, but actually begin to roll it back. That's the hopeful role that agriculture has to play in the climate change fight. Today, the bulk of support for farmers of subsidies comes in the form of crop insurance. What we are insuring against, increasingly, are the vagaries of climate change, droughts, floods, storms. But if we taxpayers are going to pick up 62% of the cost of a farmer's crop insurance, as we do now, and if we taxpayers are going to cover the overhead and profit of the insurance companies on top of that, is it too much to ask farmers to take steps to care for their soil, to reduce the risk and the moral hazard by making their farms more resilient to climate change? In the same way you get a break on your life insurance policies if you stop smoking, couldn't we give farmers a break if they planted cover crops? By doing so, they would not only hedge their bets, as well as the taxpayers' bets, but they could also begin the work of reversing climate change, acre by acre. I'm dreaming here, but that's precisely what this initiative asks us to do, to imagine a new kind of farm bill by drawing new thinkers and new thoughts into a process that has grown narrow, ossified, and counterproductive. This need not be a zero-sum deal, where farmers must lose so the public health or environment can win. But how do we get from where we are to where we need to be? Well, I'm not, as you can probably tell, a policymaker. But I'm convinced there are people in this room today that can imagine the sort of policy ideas, the amendments, the titles, the tools that will support the needs of our farmers and at the same time enhance the health of all our people as well as that of the planet. Thank you very much.
So we'll jump in. We have a distinguished panel. We also have two distinguished members of Congress. And okay? All right, we're good to go. But if at any point you guys want to jump in, feel free. Shy and retiring as you are. That was for you, Wenzel. Why don't we just, oh, you're going to, okay. I'll just sit here and let this go. I'm working without a net here.
So thank you all for coming. I'm Scott Faber with the Environmental Working Group. I'm just going to moderate today's panel.
Cool.
Why don't we just start by maybe going down the row and having folks introduce themselves, starting with Bill, and then we'll just have a conversation.
I'm Bill Wenzel. I'm the Food and Farm Program Director for U.S. PIRG, Public Interest Research Group, located here in Washington, D.C.
I guess everybody knows you. My name is Michael Lavender. I'm the Senior Washington Representative for the Food and Environment Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists.
I'm Ryan Alexander, and I'm President of Taxpayers for Common Sense.
My name is Monica Mills, and I'm the Executive Director of Food Policy Action.
Hi, I'm Suzanne McMillan, Content Director for the ASPCA's Farm Animal Welfare Campaign.
And ASPCA?
stands for American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals.
So why don't just, first, I know everyone has already read all 115 pages of your amazing legislation, which really does provide a vision for the Farm Bill that all of us would write if we all sat around a table and said, what would we want our farm and food policy to do? But maybe ask Congressman Blumenauer, just spend a minute or two just giving just a quick summary for folks who haven't had a chance to review it.
Actually, I would not like to take a lot of time on doing that because we've got some material that's available. I mean, what we are attempting to do is to reconstruct from the ground up what it would look like, dealing with many of the things that Michael talked about. We have summary information that is available to you. We actually have some copies of the bill. But three things we want to make clear. First and foremost, this is an opportunity for us to get ahead of the curve. There's going to be a bill that's going to be offered up by the committee soon. This is an opportunity for us, as Michael mentioned, we've added some titles to deal with things that will make a difference in terms of nutrition, environment, beginning farmers. We're trying to lay out a bigger picture. Second, we're trying to promote this conversation around the country. I would love to have conversations like this in Minneapolis and in New York and Oakland and Seattle and Denver, Oklahoma City, and cities large and small. The work I've done in other parts of the country, we find that people come out of the woodwork to talk about it. In Maine, it's really magic. We need to have those conversations. And last but not least, we need to engage members of Congress to understand that this isn't just the province of somebody who's on the ag committees, which are usually the province of a handful of districts that get the most benefit from the commodity crops. This matters to everybody. And to be able to let them look at the provisions that will, and we're going to hear about things for everything from animal welfare to taxpayer protection and better environmental offers. We need to make sure that members of Congress understand that it is their bailiwick. And in a sense, it's actually more important because if they don't speak out and represent their people, they're not going to be represented from this committee structure in the House and Senate. I mean that by no means of disrespect. We find in Congress that committees get captured by the people who are covered by them. I mean, that's in defense. There's an outsized role for people that are involved with the defense industry and military bases. We need to break that paradigm because I think Michael laid out the fact that everybody has a stake in this. And we have an opportunity to actually bring people together in a way that isn't contentious or too contentious. At the end of my conversations around Oregon, I found that my ranchers and farmers and academics and people who cared about the environment and animal welfare and consumer protections and health agreed on far, far more than they disagreed. And we can replicate that conversation. And if we do, I think we're going to get a much better farm bill.
And so, Michael, maybe ask you, how do we get, no pun intended, eaters to the table? How do we get people who are worried about public health, worried about diet, worried about the future of farmers in rural America? How do we get the folks who aren't, as Congressman Blumenauer said, already in front of the agriculture committees to the table?
Yeah. I want to touch the button there.
Yeah, can you hear me? Well, we all have different roles to play, I think, in that process. I mean, I do it through my writing and speaking and films and things like that. And one of the things I've found is that there is a constituency for change in food. Anyone who's, Shelley was talking about it earlier today, Shelley Pingree, that there is a new consumer out there. And you see the entire food industry moving to either reform themselves or co-op that market because there's not enough organic food to go around right now. People, there is a demand for it. So you're seeing, I think, in the marketplace, evidence of a change of consciousness. and it hasn't yet been brought into the political process. And that's why what I think is going on here is so important. It's an attempt really to invite people into the process, let them know that this is about them. This is an eater's farm bill, not a producer's farm bill only. And I think that message is getting ahead, but it's going to take leadership. It's going to take political leadership. But my sense is, from talking to those people as often as I do, that the moment is here. It's right now.
And speaking of political leadership, Food Policy Action was created to score members of Congress based on their votes on food and farm legislation. I mean, ask Monica, how do we ultimately hold members of Congress accountable when they aren't representing the eaters in their districts, or maybe only representing the heavily subsidized farmers in the district?
Well, that's correct, Scott. And what we have done is we just published our 6th annual scorecard that graded, so to speak, members of Congress and the specific votes that they took over the course of this last year. We have a vote advisory council, so this is not just us doing something on our own, but we bring a large group of advocacy folks and policy folks together to kind of go through a list and make a determination on which bills matter the most for those who are hungry or those who are looking at changing how our food policy works. And then we take that scorecard, and this year, instead of doing any kind of DC press hit, we went out and did a 50-state press strategy. So every single news outlet in the United States received this scorecard, and we had specific quotes from local chefs about their members of Congress and holding them accountable to say, you did a great job, or you did not do a good job at all. Next year, we will be very involved in looking at congressional races to hold these members accountable and to go into those districts and work on elections and make sure that their voters know that their member of Congress either was a good guy or was not.
And I think one of the things that this Congressman Blumenauer bill does is really change our farm safety net in ways that continues to help farmers weather the ups and downs of agriculture, but also saves a significant amount of money. If we could ask Ryan to talk about how do these reforms ultimately help protect taxpayers but still provide farmers with some risk management tools?
I mean, I think that at the end of the day, having some limitations and means testing and thinking about the cost is a fantastic starting point. In the past, the estimates for how much crop insurance would cost have always been low, but then there's no consequence to that. There's been no cap. You know, of course, that's the nature of an insurance program, but that's part of the reason why we have been so critical of the crop insurance program now. It is essentially profit protection. And you know, every business in the world would love having profit protection, but we can't afford to provide profit protection to everybody, so we shouldn't provide it to just one sector. We should provide a safety net that protects them from catastrophes. And I think changing the criteria, thinking about means testing are ways that we can really save a lot of money.
And of course, some farm organizations are arguing that the real solution for the rural, some of the challenges, economic challenges in rural America is to increase subsidies. Maybe you and Mike could talk about why pouring more subsidies into rural counties won't actually address some of those economic challenges.
We have been pouring many, many billions of dollars of subsidies into rural counties for decades, and yet the economies have been hollowed out, yet the availability of employment in different sectors has changed and reduced. And I think that to say, you know, gosh, this wasn't enough money, more money will definitely change the problem, is absolutely the wrong approach. And I think that it is almost speaks for itself that farm subsidies have not built diversified, strong economies in rural communities. That has not been what has happened with crop insurance. That didn't happen with direct payments. That has not been the accomplishment of the Farm Bill. And if we think just increasing the size of the subsidies that go there will produce a different result, then we can confirm that policymakers are meeting the definition of insanity.
And like, what should we instead be investing in?
Yeah, you stole my insanity line. So, right, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Well, I can tell you since 2007, more than 56,000 mid-sized farms have disappeared from this country. Mid-sized farms are defined by USDA between 50 and 1,000 acres. And mid-sized farms in whatever community they're in, they are in many ways the lifeblood of that community because they're small enough to want to maintain in that community, invest in local businesses. So why would we continue a farm bill and continue investing in the same exact things, despite the fact that we continue to lose farms? So there needs to be a reshaping of thinking. And as we talk about bringing new voices into the conversation, I do want to make the point that there are policies and programs that we can support that support both rural and urban America. There are policies that we can support that support both farmers and eaters. So we need to invest in programs that provide economic incentive for farmers so that they can capture these growing markets in rural areas. It's so critical that we do that. We need to make sure that we're investing in strong research programs, organic research, sustainable agriculture research, because young farmers, new farmers, that new generation of farmers that are coming up, they're increasingly looking towards that. And if we don't have answers for them, that's a generation lost. So we need to take a look at what we're investing in to make sure that we're investing for the future, not doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result.
And Michael, it seems like that's something that eaters would normally expect a farm bill to do. Has that been your experience?
Yeah, and you know, and it could. Sorry.
I don't even think eaters think about the farm bill right now. They don't realize that they have a dog in this fight, and that's the challenge is to show them that they do, and that there are very concrete tools that have been tried experimentally even in past farm bills. You know, prescriptions for food or vouchers given to SNAP recipients that are redeemable at farmers markets. I was just talking to a farmer in Massachusetts, and I was out at his farm in Sudbury. It's kind of a suburban CSA farm, very successful. And he had like a 1/4 acre of daikon. And I'm like, why are you growing so much daikon? And he said, well, Wholesome Way Foundation, this very good NGO that does these coupons, they gave out a bunch of coupons to SNAP recipients in Boston, and it brought the Asian market into the Copley Square Farmers Market and created all this demand for Chinese greens, which ramified all the way down to the farm, and this farmer was delighted to have a new crop. Happens to be pretty easy to grow. And so there are things we can do. I really want to pick up on that point about rural and urban, that it's not a zero-sum deal, which is really how the Farm Bill has usually been conceived. We've got SNAP for the urbanites, and we've got commodity programs for the farmers. It doesn't have to be that way. Urbanites are increasingly learning that they have an interest in what happens in the hinterlands and vice versa. And one of the most exciting things about the food movement is it's forging new connections between urbanites, suburbanites, and rural voters. And you know, I think rural voters, you know, have been turned to the current president because of the depression in rural areas and their frustration. And I don't think they're going to get very much from this administration. And I think that a new kind of farm bill has the potential to offer something really important because they really need new markets. Nothing a farmer hates more than being dependent on a single buyer, and which makes them a price taker. And so one of the provisions in this bill increases market promotion, which I think holds enormous potential.
And I know we're going to focus a lot on the eaters and how to get eaters more involved in the Farm Bill, but we might also be thinking about the drinkers, and I don't. That's afterwards. But the drink, and in particular, because farm pollution is such a significant source of drinking water pollution, every farm bill is an opportunity to incentivize changes in production that reduce the amount of nitrate, in particular, that winds up in our drinking water. Thousands and thousands of, especially small rural communities, have nitrate levels in their finished drinking water that are above 5 or even 10 parts per million. So maybe ask Bill, what are some things that we could do in a farm bill that would matter to the drinkers of tap water as well as the eaters.
Thank you. And not to disagree with our
being broadcast.
Not to disagree with our keynote speaker, but I do think that the consumers are really much more aware of farming practices, what's right and what's wrong with our farm and food policy system. And we at PIRG have done a lot of work in the marketplace, particularly on issues like antibiotic resistance and pesticide-related work and ag chemicals. And what we find are that the consumers are very knowledgeable about how food is being produced and where the problems are. I think the problem has been is that we haven't really focused a lot of attention on crop insurance and commodity programs. It's always been on food and organics, and I think part of what has happened is that there's a better understanding by consumers that if we really do want a food system that protects the public health and the environment, we really have to make fundamental change to the commodity programs and get the money going to more sustainable production systems, into rural food production, sustainable production infrastructure and market creation, and to open some of the doors up to the use of more sustainable practices in order to reduce the problems like the nitrates and the pollution in the water. We know right now through the work of Matthew Liebman at Iowa State University that we can have dramatic reductions in the use of synthetic ag chemicals merely by adding crop rotations, getting away from this year after year of corn and soybeans and monocultures, and by merely adding alfalfa into the rotation or a small grain and a cover crops, we can virtually eliminate the problems of synthetic agriculture use and the impact it has on the environment. So that's what we really need to do in this farm bill, is to take away the advantages, the significant financial advantages to those that grow commodity crops, level the playing field, which will open up the doors to more sustainable farming practices, and in the long run reduce the problems with water pollution and the potential public health issues that we're facing currently with our ag policy being what it is.
Mike, did you want to answer?
Yeah, if I could just jump in on the water quality point. I think you hear things about water quality, that how agriculture has contributed to poor water quality. So you look at the example of Toledo and Lake Erie and the issues of algae blooms there. You look in the hypoxia zone. So the Gulf of Mexico, every summer, there's an area the size of New Jersey or Connecticut. It depends on rainfall amounts that is totally devoid of life. But I think the point I want to make is that what we know from science is that some of the practices, the agricultural practices that can actually help clean the water the most and prevent it from running into lakes and streams and rivers are actually practices that can benefit farmers too. They can make healthier soil, they can increase yields, and they can bring biodiverse benefits. So again, these aren't mutually exclusive conversations. We can have both. It's just we need to invest in both, and we need to make sure there aren't barriers in the Farm Bill, in crop insurance, or barriers in the conservation programs to implementing these practices.
Another bit, we've heard a lot about the challenges posed by our diets and how our subsidy programs impact our diets, and we've heard a lot about how we could change our programs to encourage farmers to produce more fruits and vegetables and to sell directly to consumers. And of course, we've just talked about how to address some of the other public health challenges associated with agriculture, including poor drinking water. We also raise about 10 million animals here, in oftentimes in inhumane conditions. What are the things that we can do in the Farm Bill to change how we raise animals, so we raise them more humanely, and also address some of the environmental impacts associated with animal production?
Yeah, and I'll just correct you there. That number is actually in the billions.
I'm sorry, that's
so it is
billion.
Yes, which is mind-boggling. But we're talking about over 9 billion land animals only, that number does not include marine animals, being raised for food in the U.S. on an annual basis, and the number has been rising. And so we see that animals intersect with us in society and in our daily lives on our plates, arguably more than in any other space. And they have very few laws protecting them federally or on the state level. It's a meager sort of patchwork system of welfare provisions for animals, and there are no federal laws governing on-farm treatment of farm animals, with the exception of the organic regulations, which we are now engaged. There's a separate battle, which you may have heard mentioned earlier by Wayne, around those. We have quite a strong set of regulations that were finalized recently by USDA, and yet it is now refusing to implement those rules. But so the Farm Bill offers us really sort of an interesting challenge and opportunity around farm animal welfare, because while it does not tend to call out animal welfare directly or explicitly, there are major implications in terms of any programs addressing meat, milk, eggs are going to have a direct impact on the way these animals are being raised, transported, slaughtered, and so forth. And so there are huge opportunities to have a positive impact on welfare through the Farm Bill. And one of the ASPCA's main objectives has been, even before involvement in Farm Bill work, just in general through our Shop With Your Heart campaign, one of our focuses is in the sector of the marketplace that deals with third-party auditing and oversight of animal welfare standards on farm. And so there are a variety of certification programs already out on the market doing quite well, growing annually because there's huge consumer demand for better practices on farm and to have the transparency piece so that exactly how animals are being raised is clear. And it's a great value-added proposition for farmers because they're able to secure a seal or a label essentially on their product, meat, milk, or eggs on the market that essentially provides a cue to the consumer regarding the value that's gone into that product. And this is the area where we think there's a huge opportunity in the Farm Bill to essentially incentivize those sorts of production practices by allowing support and encouragement and reward really for farms to transition more into being welfare certified or to be able to maintain their certification if that's something they've already gone after.
And before I throw it open to you, I'm going to just ask Congressman Blumenauer to answer the question that Jerry Hagstrom, I think, asked at the press event, which is, what's different this time?
Well, there are a couple of things I think are different. One is we've spent almost 3 years trying to provide a framework that integrates all of these items and specific provisions that speak to what we've heard from people. I've been working on this for 20 years, and I've never started a Farm Bill cycle with something that I could look at in a comprehensive way and talk to my colleagues, talk to the press, use as a point of departure. So just for me, I've got more tools to be able to expand this conversation and to be able to do what I did in Oregon for a couple years. If any of my colleagues are interested, or if other people want, we can do the same thing in Minneapolis or Oakland or Tulsa that I think can help galvanize that attention. So I think that point of departure is important. Also, I can't say enough about what Michael and some of the visionary people, and we could, Alice Waters, they're all these celebrity chefs, Plate of the Union at the conventions, bringing people here on Capitol Hill, some of which have been hosted by Shelley Pingree, that really get members turning out and looking at these items. This is really remarkable. We've not seen that before. And I think the awareness that we're seeing with a wide variety of people that it doesn't have to be this way is different. And I do think that in this time of Trump, there are more people who are engaged, who want to do something. In Little Portland, Oregon, there were 100,000 people who were marching the day after the inauguration. We're watching people come out of the woodwork who want to do something. And most of them, you know, some of them are ready to be involved in partisan politics. Most of them, I think, would like to be involved with something that makes them feel better, that doesn't have to go right to the party. This is an area that we can engage people, that doesn't have to be red state, blue state, doesn't have to be Republican, Democrat, doesn't have to be conservative or liberal. There is a coalition, and we've seen this in terms of the fiscal responsibility. It's amazing the people who are coming to the table who just think that we're not spending the money right and in ways that are perverse, that actually undermine not just our fiscal integrity, but send the wrong signals to have the wrong behaviors. I think people are hungry not just for healthy, nutritious food. I think people are hungry for a dialogue that they can bring neighbors together, that they can bring business in agriculture, in retail, that they can have a common meeting place. And I think that is a fundamental difference, that I think all of these things are coming together in a way to make the time right.
So we'd love to have your questions or comments, so who'd like to ask a question?
Or make a comment.
First questioner can have the Twinkies or the carrots.
Actually, the Twinkies have been claimed.
No.
Sir.
Yes, Congressman Joe Maxwell with the Organization for Competitive Markets. One, we appreciate the introduction within this legislation of the restoration through legislative act on the gypsum rules. Without those, we're going to lose more of those middle farmers without having the meaningful language that those represent. So we come here today to thank you, Congressman, for including that. It wasn't mentioned by the panelists, but we want you to know how much we appreciate it.
Sir.
This is kind of to all of you, but what do you guys, or how do you guys feel about hemp, and where does it fit in the agricultural sector?
Well, this is another issue I work on in my spare time. Having spent a lot of time working on cannabis policy, and one of the aspects of our cannabis policy that's insane is that you can buy hemp products all over America. It's just that in the main it has to be imported. You know, George Washington has got to probably spinning in his grave for a number of reasons, but our founding fathers and mothers produced hemp. Hemp is an amazingly valuable, versatile crop. There are people ready to go. We've started to loosen up opportunities. It's kind of ironic that it gets caught up with the marijuana discussion, because although there are some similar characteristics, you can't smoke enough hemp to get a high. It should be something that is widely available. You can eat it, you can make all sorts of products out of it. There are hemp fairs, and it's just one area of where there are people in Kentucky, for example, who are right out of the box, ready to go. We've got some flexibility at the state level to be able to move it forward. But this is really nuts. And I think we're going to see in the next couple of years, and actually we were able to put an amendment in the last Farm Bill to open up research in hemp. And I'm hopeful that there may be some space in the next Farm Bill to try and inject some rationality in terms of our policies towards it, because it ought to be easier for American farmers to be able to produce hemp, and for us to have more hemp products that have local content and the environmental benefits that come with it.
I'm Tessa Pulaski, and I've done some work with Harvard Law Food and Policy Clinic, and then also working with Catholic Relief Services right now. And the administration budgeted $0 for Food for Peace. Obviously Congress is upset about that, but I know we've been talking mostly about domestic issues, but how can we continue to advocate for international food assistance and sustainability when we are in this domestic situation?
Yes, we actually should have a complete reappraisal of our policies dealing with international food assistance. And one of the first things we should do is spend less money shipping subsidized crops overseas. It gets there late because of the law that it has to be under the Jones Act. It has to be transmitted in an American ship with American crew, so it takes longer, it's more expensive, it gets there late, and it undercuts local production. If we would just use cash assistance, we would be able to not drive out local production. It would happen faster, buying it locally or wherever it's most readily at hand. And there are much more efficient ways to help American farmers rather than an elaborate, inefficient, expensive way that actually undercuts food security around the globe. Ryan, you want?
Yeah, I would just say I think this is one of those areas where, you know, why it's different is that international food assistance, kind of all these provisions in the Farm Bill where fiscal conservatives have been able to kind of look at it and say, this makes no sense, it's expensive, we can do something more efficient, more effective, and while some of those folks may say we should provide no assistance, they're generally fairly pragmatic and know that that's probably not going to happen. So if we're going to do it, let's do it effectively, efficiently, and do more for less. It's one of the few areas where you can actually can do more with less.
I'm from Congressman Seth Moulton's office, and I'm wondering about if there's anything in this bill to address the issue of food deserts. Because it's one thing if, you know, subsidies change and we're able to make prices lower, but it's another if nobody can actually go and purchase these. So is there anything within this bill that would address that?
Monica, do you want to take that one? Or?
I think it's for the congressman, because he knows what's in the bill.
That was one of the areas that we sought to address in terms of a broad definition of food security, local access, and we hope, in fact, with a variety of provisions, promoting local production, the things that were talked about in terms of more efficient food assistance. We've got a range of things that we hope will more effectively deal with the fact that too many low-income Americans, it's outrageous. They pay more for inferior food. So it really works against them. It's not healthy, it's too expensive, and there are economic opportunities that we could be engaging. And the other thing that I feel very strongly about is doing more for local direct access, CSAs, farmers markets. And I have this wild vision that we ought to, the Department of Agriculture is the only department in the federal government that can build a community from the ground up. I mean, housing, utilities, loans, but most of it is not very effective. It's not tested in terms of it. There are things that we ought to be able to do to coax more out of that. But we invite your attention to it, see if there's something we missed.
I also just want to add that what I think we're hearing is that our food system is just out of balance as it relates to international, domestic, urban, rural, the commodity program, the SNAP program that is means tested, but the commodity program is not. It's just skewed in the wrong way. And I think that what we really need to focus on is looking at a system that provides healthy, affordable food for all. This should not be a partisan issue. This is an every person issue. And so I think that as we move forward, those are some of the key pieces that we really need to keep in mind.
Do you have any questions?
Oh, Bill, you had a comment?
Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, and I'll just build on that a little bit. I think one of the really important things is we've got to recognize that the industrial agriculture system that we put in place has really decimated our rural economies. All of the businesses that once provided service to the farmers in the area, the fertilizers, the seeds, the tractors, the machinery, and who also processed and sold food that was produced, they're all gone. And they're not going to come back. The one chance we do have for rural development is by creating more opportunities for local and regional food systems to develop and combine that with a strong conservation program and an environmental approach and build out the infrastructure. And that will provide a lot of jobs in rural America that you're just not going to get in industrialized agriculture. So there's a lot of opportunities that are out there if we kind of take this holistic approach that Representative Blumenauer is promoting, and I think that it provides a lot of opportunities for farmers, environmentalists, entrepreneurs, and consumers alike.
Could I just,
please?
I talk too much, but you're touching on something that I feel so strongly about. Industrialized agriculture produces fewer jobs. A lot of them are not very nice jobs. We have an opportunity, if we reset the priorities, deal with more choices in terms of where farmers sell. These are labor intensive. If you're going to have organic and sustainable, and if you're going to create some of these, this infrastructure for people can process and have direct marketing, you put a lot of people to work. And part of what we've tried to do in this legislation is also speak to the crying need we have for the men and women who labor in agriculture. Many of them immigrants, some undocumented, but men and women who really put heart and soul into that work, who are not well treated. And I will tell you that this is a national problem, that the fact that we have a very reckless immigration and erratic immigration policy really is putting at risk some of the most important and high value parts of our agricultural industry. I was at, my wife and I were at a marvelous couple events this last weekend by the Oregon wine industry. And every year they come together for a massive benefit to raise money for the health care needs of their employees. Many of whom I've found as I've traveled around in the vineyards, with nursery, these people are literally like extensions of family. And they practice a very skilled trade. And if we don't get our policies straight, people who help this move put at risk some of the most important and valuable part of our agricultural system. And it touches millions of lives. So jobs, yes, but there's also a human cost that we need to be sensitive to in terms of how we treat agricultural workers, their path forward with immigration, how they are treated, and having more opportunities in value-added agriculture rather than in industrial, mechanized, dangerous agriculture.
So we have time for maybe one more question back here.
I was wondering if you had any scores for the different titles within this bill from CBO?
It'll cost less. But no, we just introduced it today, unless Kevin's got something in his back pocket. We will work that through. And we welcome, and let me just say, we deeply appreciate you're all spending time with us this afternoon. We welcome the various offices to be involved, the groups and organizations that can help in terms of refining it. This is going to be a work in progress. We're proud of the bill, but we know that it can be improved and we can learn. We'll be pushing 4 scores, but we'll have an opportunity, if we do this right and make it production and results oriented, make it competitive, we can save a lot of money while we can help more people do more things.
Please help me thank our great panel.